changing the scenery a little bit. We're coming back to you with a panel discussion to raise your appetite for more content. And it's a very important talk and very important topic because Europe's cyber defense has never been more interconnected. Actually, as we learned yesterday, it's not even Europe, it's the whole world. We had a guest from Australia and we had common interests and points to work on. So interconnection, dependency and collective action is very, very important. So the next panel will bring leaders from the government, from defense, from the industry to discuss how the EU can turn that strategy, which is on the paper level, to a real world coordinated action. So, with your applause, let's welcome on the stage the whole panel that's going to talk right now, led by the moderator, the director of the Secretariat of the Latvian Presidency of the Council of the EU, Mr. Edgars Kiukucāns. Round of applause to him and the colleagues. All right, gentlemen, Edgars, take it away.
Thank you and good morning, and it's great to be back in the cyber field for a while. And today I have three wonderful speakers on the panel. I think they are connecting government from Latvia, also from the very heart of Europe, from Belgium, but we also have someone from the private sector as well. So I will introduce my panelists today. So right next to me is Mr. Pieter Byttebier, and he's the head of the International Policy, EU Affairs and National Coordination for the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium, where he has worked since 2018. And in his role, he advises the CCB management and represents the CCB on the international and national matters. Pieter was the CCB coordinator for the Belgian presidency, during which he was seconded to the Belgian permanent representation to the EU, and he also has been the chair of the EU Cyclone Network. So yeah, that's Pieter from Belgium. Then next to Pieter we have someone who for the locals I don't think needs any introduction, but still that is Varis Teivāns. He is the deputy manager of CERT.LV. He is a cybersecurity expert for more than 17 years, and he has a strong technical background. He has played a major role in development of the national cybersecurity infrastructure, world-class incident response capability, and full range of security operations center services provided by CERT.LV. Varis has participated in planning, technical setup and scenario development of multiple hackfests, large-scale cyber defense exercises and workshops on IT security issues at the CERT.LV organized events. And last, but definitely not the least, is Mr. Uldis Tatarčuks. He's a prominent Latvian executive, the CEO of TET, which is a leading technology and telecommunications company in Latvia. He has been the CEO since 2021 already, and before that he was also the CTO at TET and board member for nearly 10 years. Before that he was the chairman of the board and commercial director of Citrus Solutions, and he has also held position as board chairman at the G4S and was a regional business leader at Byttebier as well. About this discussion today. So we are talking about EU cyber defense as a collective responsibility, and we're looking more in detail about how to bring the cyber defense policy from strategy to action. And of course the scenery right now is consisting of several elements, and one of that is of course the increased hybrid nature of the conflict, civilian, military, physical and digital domains. Secondly, there is of course the challenging geopolitical situation that we're facing and ever-evolving cyber threat landscape, and of course there is a growing need to move from reactive to proactive cyber defense. We also see that there is need for more cooperation between EU and NATO on this. We need to understand how to balance sovereignty with collective responsibility, how we also connect speed of cyber response that is needed with the traditional EU decision-making pace. And finally, of course, the involvement of the private sector. That is also a very, very important element in all of this. Before I start with my first question, I would like to remind you that you can ask your questions on Menti. And please do not save them until the very last moment. You can send them right away, and we will have time to respond to those questions at the end of the discussion. But let's start with the first introductory question. So we know that the EU has made significant progress in defining cyber defense, cybersecurity policy, but it seems from the outside that the implementation seems fragmented. And my question is, how can we ensure that these strategies become operational across the EU? I would like to start with the perspectives from two member states, from two governments, and let's start with Pieter, because you're closer to me, and let's start with you. Yeah.
Well, paldies for having me here in this beautiful city. I think you outlined the problems quite well that we're facing, and I'll try to be a little bit provocative on this as well. One of the major challenges in starting to implement all of this is the sheer complexity of the governance framework that there is. I don't know if anybody looked at the cyber blueprint that came out before the summer. At the end, there's an annex that has a visual on just the cyber security aspect, so not even the cyber defense. It's a very complex picture. There's a lot of entities there, and it's already within the cybersecurity community difficult to have that understanding of, okay, technical level, operational level, political level. There's the council, there's the commission. Everybody does something on cyber, how to divide that up. And during that negotiation on that blueprint, we thought about adding a column on cyber defense. And it was very difficult to do it because nobody from the cybersecurity side, at least, really understood how the cyber defense on the EU level was organized, and maybe you don't even know on your side. So that's the perception, at least. So if we have that as a fact, it already becomes very difficult to work towards that integration. So our plea is to start with a good understanding of roles and responsibilities, not within each community just, but also between these communities. And that's complex at an EU level, but it starts at the national level already. And that's what we do also in Belgium. There's 27 different setups of how cybersecurity and cyber defense are organized in member states. I've noticed here in Latvia there's a little bit of a closer relationship with defense, I think, than we have in Belgium, where it's very different atmospheres. And so we're currently writing a new cybersecurity strategy. And what we did is before starting to collaborate, take a step back and define the roles and responsibilities and the differences, and start from there and on how we can collaborate more nationally between the two. What are the different tasks and responsibilities and roles from there? And then, if we understand that well, let's see what the added value is towards the EU and back. And then we can close that loop on the EU level. And then maybe at some point we can also see how NATO fits into all of that. Because so we have a step-by-step approach that starts from the differences, where we have the same goal but different tasks. We're pilot and co-pilot on the same thing, but on security, the civil agency is the pilot and the other one the co-pilot, and on defense maybe the other way around. But having those clear roles, I think that's the basic starting point. And I have some ideas on how to define those roles, at least in Belgium, but I'll leave that for later.
Okay, thank you, Pieter. As a small follow-up question, you mentioned that in every member state the organization is different. For example, in Latvia, it is closer to the defense because the cybersecurity center is under the Ministry of Defense. How do you evaluate that? Would you see that it might bring merits that you bring cybersecurity, a typically civilian sector, under the defense, or do you see that it should stay in the civilian part and we should not mix those?
I can only speak from my side. I don't have enough experience to see what the benefits are on your side, but I'm also here to talk with the colleagues here and learn what the possible benefits are. But in setting up the government that we have in Belgium, there was thought of, well, why do we have the Cybersecurity Center and the Cyber Command? Let's just fuse them. But the arguments that were made at that time is it's actually good to have those pilot, co-pilot mutual roles also towards the public. The military traditionally has a clear role in defending borders, and we see ourselves more as the fire brigade within the borders. But of course, in cyber, national borders become quite different to interpret. So there is more overlap, but having that conceptual difference, I think, is a good starting point. Also towards critical infrastructure, for instance, where if something happens, civilian authorities come and they don't immediately bring the people in uniform with them. But I think that relationship is not just a conceptual one, it's linked to national culture as well. It's the threat of war in Belgium is perhaps a little bit less tangible than it is here, given your neighbors, or neighbor, let's say. That makes that relationships towards the military a little bit different. And so there is a feeling within society that it's good to have those different roles, and the one can support the other in the civilian domain, just as if when there is a big crisis and civilian authorities are overwhelmed, military will step in. But we don't want soldiers on the street on a daily basis to support the police, for instance, which is also a discussion that we're having right now. We don't have enough money for police. Let's fuse them with the military. People feel a little bit strange about it. So these national differences, they're all over Europe, I think. So I think we have to follow that first. And that's the power of Europe, where we bring it together, but it also creates a little bit of a complex situation where you have to deal with those 27 different approaches.
Good, thank you, Pieter. Let's turn to Varis. And the initial question was about the strategy, how to make it operational, and maybe trying to follow up also on what Pieter said. Do you see any similarities with Belgium as well here? But yeah, from your perspective, what's the situation?
So I think any strategy and policy has to be also, the result has to be hands-on. So you cannot stay on the paper, and this is essential, I think, to kind of bring the whole Europe and member states on a more or less similar level in the cybersecurity. So, and this is also a Latvian approach, I'm sure many other nations as well. So the idea as to normalize and bring the European cybersecurity level up to certain stages is excellent. However, it has to be tested. It has to be a hands-on approach. It is not enough just to, as previous talkers during today's session mentioned, people are a very crucial part in the whole process. Even though the technologies are something that we rely on, it is essential that we make sure that also questionnaires through the NIS2 directives that we receive, they are valid and true. I'm not trying to say we don't have to trust people, but we have to double check. And this is I think, very important, and builds even further trust and both ways. Those subjects that are, subjected to NIS2 director and institutions that are responsible to supervise them, work with them, and build the world a more secure place. Also, it very much depends again on people, how you interact with your communities and involved parties in the cybersecurity process. It doesn't always end well if, for example, cybersecurity is under the defense or intelligence. But there are excellent examples. For example, in UK, I think it's a great example how organization responsible for cybersecurity and still under the somewhat intelligence mechanism or apparatus is very outreached and close to general population, open, I think that can be achieved also elsewhere. It very much depends how we approach that. And with our own examples here in Latvia, we work very closely with both with law enforcement community, local and international, as well as defense. Our threat hunting operations with Canadian Cyber Command is, I think, an excellent example. And just to be specific on our model, CERT.LV is not military per se. We are under the MOD and funded by MOD from the defense budget, but still very close to community and general population, open and somewhat located in academia. So it's a hybrid approach, probably very much different from something that you might see elsewhere, but it works. So effects, they speak for themselves.
Thank you, Varis. And Uldis, listening to this government perspective on how things are implemented, how the EU policies land in the national governments, how do they land in the private sector? Do you feel them? Do you feel that there are EU different strategies, policies on cyber, and in your everyday work, do you see them working?
Oh, absolutely. We feel them because we provide critical infrastructure, and we have to follow a list of legislation, a list of rules, and so on. And yes, we feel them. We want them to be more practical, because you can write the best, like Latvia Strategy 2030. It's perfect document, but the question is, well, how it's implemented. Same goes for the cyber defense related questions. We will be in better shape if we have like less or shorter regulations, but more practical tests, more practical events, simpler guidelines what to follow, more cooperation, and so on, so on, so on. So the practical aspect can significantly improve overall situation. And even if we will write like regulation or 400 pages, it will help actually very little. So we would like to have clearer guidelines, shorter documents, and more partnership or more cooperation with government. And actually, we are in good shape. I do believe that in Latvia, CERT is located in the right space. And sometimes we have a challenge, the same in Europe and locally, that we have war for 3 years already. And yet, in 1,000 days, we haven't started to work faster in many areas. We are still too slow, too late, even when we are watching real war happening. And this is a bit strange. So we need to be faster to act and implement like different kind of regulations and rules, and make like real test scenario analysis. We have locked shields in our premises every year with NATO, but I don't have any European Union cyber event happening on a like 27 country scale at all at this point. There are some exercises, but compared to NATO, there is no analog event in Europe.
Is it true, Pieter? I saw that you want to comment on that.
There is a big Cyber Europe exercise that we think is very important, and it's too small in size right now. It should actually be bigger, but the implication of private sector often depends on the member states itself, how far they want to go, how much they want to implicate private stakeholders in the national community. But having something at the EU level the size of locked shields, no, that's correct. We don't have that. But then I wonder whether it's needed. Well, we're both members of EU and NATO. If we're already doing it on a NATO side, should we duplicate it on an EU side? That's where I think that there would be definitely merit, and that we're missing is testing more on an EU level on a political response. We do technical exercises, we do some operational exercises, but and this is where I think what is missing between civilian and military. Last year in the Cyber Europe exercise, of course, these scenarios are written that it's a big crisis, everything happens. And I remember my Director General noticed, here you have a map of Europe with colors how bad everything is. And everything is almost red. Okay, are we going to invoke Article 5? Who are we going to shoot back at? What's the response? Of course, we want to take care of our infrastructure, but how are we going to react to this? And this is not tested enough. There's not a lot being discussed on how this is coordinated. Of course, it's a national prerogative to defend yourself, but on the EU level, we want to respond to that as well, or at least coordinate politically if we fall below the Article 5 threshold of NATO. So I think definitely there is room to collaborate more and to put commanders and directors together if they're not already, and decide, okay, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, and that's the whole picture from responding to reacting.
And I have to give a credit to Cyber Europe. The exercise is evolving.
Yes.
It is somewhat different, but it's fine. I think it's very good that it's sectoral focused.
Yeah.
And it helps definitely to focus attention on maybe some spaces that have been left out or forgotten at some point.
For sure, yeah, no bad word on Cyber Europe. It's more a call to Europe to do more on this regard.
You mentioned about the involvement of the political leadership. Do you see, and probably Pieter and Varis, do you see that there is enough interest in the political leadership about cybersecurity, cyber defense? Has the topic reached the political level? Maybe Pieter, you can follow up.
I think it has, but I think the word cyber for politicians, it's a difficult one to conceptualize. It's, this is becoming technical really quickly. What do I do? And then they defer to technical experts, understandably. I think, on the other hand, what you then see in certain crises, and that this is not just cyber, politicians come in and they want to manage the entire crisis, which is not something that they're trained for necessarily. So somewhere in between, I think there is this balance to be found. Do I want more exercises in which ministers are involved? It would be interesting, not too much, not too many, of course. But of course, politicians change. I think it's more an institutional thing. And I remember in 2022, the French presidency held an exercise that reached the Coreper level of the ambassadors, and they wanted to go to a minister level in February 2022. But then somehow we were overtaken by a real crisis, and it became a little bit confusing whether we were exercising or whether this was a real scenario. I think there's awareness, but I don't think that there's an institutional reflex or procedures in place necessarily to respond and react and have the entire overview. I mean, there is IPCR in place, there are structures, but they're not, they can be developed more, let me put it like that. And this is what Europe is doing. It's gradually trying to catch up with what NATO is already doing very much.
Varis, from your perspective?
I think it is getting some traction, definitely, and it should be more, so that they are able to make informed decisions, right? Yes. Otherwise, it wouldn't work well. And we can see some interesting examples or initiatives with the intentions to kind of bring the cloud services more in Europe or use the European technologies, but sometimes they have a decision or discussion, and then there's a lack of knowledge. Well, do we have this infrastructure in Europe, or big enough infrastructure in Europe to accommodate these issues? So, and it's not only that, a lot of other things. So I definitely think that we are on the right track, but we should involve decision makers more. Probably not in the same way that we have these technical exercises, but they should be able to make informed decisions.
Okay, let's turn a bit more to the civilian-military cooperation, and you know, the term has been used a lot, and it's one of those concepts where that everyone likes to mention, but not always it is well connected with practical actions. And From your perspective, does this work in cyber, the civilian-military cooperation, and how the EU can better integrate civilian and military crisis response mechanisms, and if there is a cross-border large-scale incident or I say cyber crisis? So maybe Varis, you can start.
So, as I said, we have an example, and I'm sure it works. It very much depends how you build the framework, how you use the tools, how you normalize the process, because those are different environments. But it definitely can be productive and work. We have been able to do that not only with our Canadian partners, but also with European partners, and it actually. There's a lot of benefits when you recognize these differences also. For example, with military, you can deploy these people for half a year to a specific location, and they provide additional brain power, hands on keyboard, etc., which is much more complicated to kind of take from a civilian cybersecurity organization, for example, 10 people, and bring them somewhere else. And with civil military cooperation, that works exactly like that, and it's perfect. And this rotation approach is also beneficial for both parties or multiple parties, because it also rotates the knowledge, and it is a vast opportunity to train both the hands-on operators and also cyber commanders, because someone has to manage the team. And one of our major goals was not only, obviously, this is the primary to make Latvia resilient and a tough target, etc., being able to find these adversaries as soon as possible. However, the additional goal is to normalize processes, approach to how we do cybersecurity, so that in case real crisis is something that we have to face, and maybe even ask for help from other member states, we know how each member state operates, what to expect from each other, what tools are involved, etc., etc. So again, from policy to very practical level, it is very, very important.
Pieter, would you like to add something to that?
Well, I mean, coming back to what I said first in this panel, that the different tasks, what I see from a civilian side, what the military has that we don't, for me it boils at this point down to three things. It's certain information that we have no access to, that, I mean, as intelligence services, they see more than we can. So that could help not just the reactive, but especially the proactive defense, vulnerabilities that they might have seen, or specific attack factors that might help us warn. So that's one. A second is, of course, a legal framework for them to fight back. In certain cases, that's not something that we can do, but it's part of the react part of the chain, where we just focus on extinguishing the fire. And the third one, of course, I don't know how it is in Latvia, but in Belgium, there's a lot of money being thrown towards the military. We're a bad NATO pupil. We have to up our investment in military spending significantly in the upcoming years. So there's a lot of money going to the military and to cyber command specifically, which is then not going to us, of course. And it translates into capacity that can support analysis or a certain support in other areas, both technical and operational. So I think having that as a support towards the civilian, I think that can help already on a national level. And if this is the case in all member states, that closing that loop, that feedback loop from each community up and back down to feed that national level, I think that that's one thing. Looking from the other side, what we have that the military doesn't have, I think, is a total overview of the national picture. We have the relationships with the infrastructure, with also smaller companies. And what we've set up in Belgium is that incident notification happens in the civilian authority. But the military has said, all right, all our military suppliers, let them also notify their incidents to you. Then you have the full picture, and you bring that information to us, makes it easier for private sector not to go and have to notify an incident according to EU legislation and then according to a contract with the military on 2 different places. It makes it easier. So I think there on a national level it can help. And we were very much on the CCB side a proponent at the EU level having a kind of a central overview of not just cybersecurity and cyber defense, but also cyber law enforcement, sectoral points of view. There's all these different groups, but there's no real place, operationally speaking, where all of this comes together in a kind of an EU crisis center. And I think this is where all these different communities at the EU level, cybersecurity, defense, diplomacy, etc., if they could come together, I think then we would have that fuller overview, which would then also strengthen on the national level that cooperation. Yeah. So it's a feedback loop circle kind of thing.
Community is a key word, I think, here, because I definitely see that throughout the CERT team history, we have now a huge community in Europe, and it's also global. So CERT community, ENISA involved in this whole process. It works almost like a self-sustained mechanism, and when you see member states face smaller or bigger crises, you just shout out or ask some questions or support, and someone definitely will bring their support in. So maybe it's not in a so officialized way, but it works, and maybe it can be even instrumented further.
Yeah. Uldis, from the perspective of TET, have you cooperated with the Latvian National Armed Forces in cyber? But also from the broader perspective, have you seen any shifts in this public-private cooperation in cyber lately? I don't know, throughout the last 5 years, let's say.
We cooperate pretty effectively, I do believe, because maybe it's due to the size of Latvia. We know each partner. We can call each other. We can meet the Ministry of Defense today in this environment, CERT, all big Latvian enterprises. So we communicate pretty effectively. And yes, I believe that each layer has its own tasks, like military has the military tasks, civil environment have their tasks, their reporting systems. The question is how they cooperate. And we are pretty slow in Latvia. Why I'm saying so? Because, for example, such a simple thing like standards for data center provisioning from private enterprises to state are being created for 2 years. I can promise you, with help of Copilot and some other systems, I can make them in 3 days. Even in Latvian, if you want in Lithuanian language. But we are taking like 2 years discussion, and there is I believe there is a huge risks in Latvia. Not so sure about other countries when government is trying to do everything by itself. Well, government will build data centers. Hey guys, I do it better. I do it more efficiently. Just set the standards for the industry, and the industry will deliver, and they will compete, and the competition always generate the best result. Some of the part of cyber defense, most probably military, but not all of it has to be controlled by the government itself. Yes, we are agreeing to that, but not everything. Yeah, it's the approach is too wide, and the more private companies will be involved, not only in Latvia, but in Europe, the more progress we will have, the more technological knowledge we will have, and so on, so on, so on. Because when we talking about the sovereign cloud, we had a big discussion in Secretariat in Riga last week. Guys from Brussels are talking about the European sovereign cloud. And each country is talking about Latvia's sovereign cloud, Estonia's sovereign cloud. So which sovereign cloud we are talking about? The total European, which also includes all countries like Hungary and Mr. Orban and so on. Yes, not very interested at this point from my perspective, but no, we cannot agree what we are talking about. And then we are saying, like, okay, if you want to take a big hyperscale cloud services, they are not provided by states. It's not American or British or German. They are Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. Yeah? You're talking about the companies which can deliver. So when we are talking about European cloud, we should pick some company names in Europe which will deliver this European cloud, not produced by or powered by European Union, because I believe the bureaucrats in Bristol cannot code yet.
But I think also the challenge is the scale, and the business regulates itself, and I don't think that Amazon, Google, and Microsoft were picked. They did something, right?
They saw the opportunity.
Yeah, and those European companies, they also have to use the opportunity if it's even there. I mean, maybe it's too late.
A small follow-up to all this, and we often talk about what the government should do, how they should support the private sector, which they absolutely do need to do, and there is no question about that. What would you say? What is the responsibility of the private sector in ensuring states' cyber resilience? Do you see that there is like a responsibility that you have to ensure something in order to make the state function better?
Very important thing. We are not asking for government support.
Well,
from industry
I'm not saying about
absolutely
definitely about that. I'm just saying in general there is the perception that
I'm not talking only about that, about talking about the whole industry. What we are asking for is like set of rules. Please tell us what is the criteria for data center provisioning. Please tell us what is the criteria for cloud provisioning. Please tell us what are the criteria for cybersecurity solutions provisioning. It's our job to figure out how to make it more effective, how to comply to standards, how to comply to security clearance for our employees, which we agree that this is, in some cases, should be in place, and so on, so on. So how we can comply, and what are the environment in which we should operate, what are the rules, what are the criteria. That's all. Not for support. Not for support. That was the first but important part.
But about the, how do you see your responsibility? Maybe do you see any, or you've?
We see our responsibility absolutely. I do believe that majority of the big, small, and medium-sized companies in Latvia are in correspondence with all the legislation. We are set as a critical infrastructure by legislation. We are following all the protocols. We are cooperating with all the instances. We understand our role. And I'm not talking about the company. I'm talking about all the companies. Because what we saw in case of Ukraine, there is not like somebody providing all critical infrastructure. Every infrastructure is critical. They were able to act because all mobile operators cooperated, all of them. If there is like 3, all of them should cooperate. And absolutely, yeah, that's what we are doing. We are building new connections to the Europe because it's not only a question that we are doing it because of national security issues. We see the business opportunity also. Let's be honest in this area. We are building interconnections to Lithuania, Estonia via Baltica cable. We are deploying and using sea cables because there is a business opportunity also there, which goes together with cyber defense or critical infrastructure provisioning.
Yeah, thank you for that. Varis, maybe you want to follow up on what Uldis said, but also a question to you about, in general, about the public-private cooperation. Do you, from the government side, do you see any major shifts in how this cooperation is building throughout the last years? You know, for a really long time, I would say that everything that was related to security and defense was seen as a highly sensitive issue, which often hindered even information sharing, let alone any other cooperation. Has the mindset changed?
Mindset has definitely changed. Maybe all the necessary things are still moving. Sometimes I could agree. Sometimes a little bit too slow, but they are moving, and most of them in the right direction. We can see, for example, supply chain security. The private sector has recognized that this is important, both for government and also for them to stay, sometimes to stay in the business, or sometimes to demonstrate that they are trusted. So both parties are more open on what is actually expected. The private sector demonstrates that they care about that, not only on the technical level, but also personnel, like you mentioned. So that is definitely changing, and the regulation sometimes it is maybe a burden, but it also, if done correctly, it helps. So it defines how these countermeasures could be implemented. Sometimes the regulation even defends the private sector so that they can decline some unwanted offers from other private sector members that are not trusted, for example. So definitely it shifts in the right direction. The speed of some regulations, I could again maybe agree that it's sometimes too slow, but it is also a cultural thing. Now with the crisis and geopolitical situation, we want to be, as a government, we want to do it right. Probably that is also creating additional burden on certain organizations and people, that it is moving too slow. But I would also encourage more involvement from private sector and government, be more open to take in these suggestions, views, and just to add on your note about the cooperation in the private sector, an example with Ukraine, I think it's very good, and definitely it demonstrates how important in case of crisis it is to put aside some competition and work together. However, it is also an evidence that it actually kicked off when the crisis started. And in Latvia, we also still don't have a national roaming, for example. It doesn't work that my mobile phone, for example, that is operating in one company can actually use other cell towers in case of emergency or crisis. And Ukraine is actually, again, example where it was instrumental during the first months of the war.
Yeah. And the important thing, I believe we live in totally different situations. I'm not sure that society in Belgium perceives invasion of Russia as a real threat in Belgium. Welcome to Latvia.
Yeah.
We see the challenge a bit differently. That's why we see the situation in Ukraine differently, and that's why we are preparing our cybersecurity and supply chains differently, because we have like this iron wall on our eastern border. We cannot plan our supply chains only one direction, actually, west. And actually, business is very practical. We were working on energy consumption issues even before ESG regulation was in place. It was important for us not to spend a lot of money on ineffective energy consumption. Supply chain, even without regulation, every business takes care about it, because if you don't have it in place, you are simply bankrupt, with or without regulation. Yeah. So, but some additions are always welcome. Yeah.
Thank you. Pieter, listening to the Latvian discussion there, do you also feel that in Belgium the mindset has changed? Belgium was mentioned before about probably living in a bit different geopolitical situation than we are, but still about also the public-private cooperation. Has the mindset changed in Belgium?
Well, maybe I'm too young to have noticed a big change, but in the last 6-7 years that I've been at the CCB, I've perceived that cooperation between the public and the private sector was always there, but is continuing to grow along that mindset as we grow and the private sector grows. Maybe to point out on Ukraine and to be quite clear, Belgium has full support for Ukraine, not just the government, but actually the population. But it is very true that not a lot of people think about that it's possible that the Russian army would be in Brussels very soon. And the fact that we luckily haven't had any major cybersecurity incidents contributes to that fact, because that's the way how Russia would be in Belgium. It's via cyber incident, and we only have noticed really big DDoS attacks that we've noticed publicly, which are more a nuisance than so it shapes the perception. But on public-private cooperation, I think what our management clearly noted as a success story is when the invasion happened, that all this data from government, from Ukraine, was quickly secured by some of the bigger American providers, which was a very good example of helping each other out. And I think this is the mindset that we have. We can offer things as government, and the private sector can also offer things that go together. And legislation, regulation is one thing that we can help out companies internally to add that little extra element for that risk balance, to say, okay, we're going to invest a little bit more in cybersecurity so that on the long term our products or services will be secure. But one thing that we did, and I'm institutionally obliged to mention the cyber fundamentals, it's one of these very concrete frameworks that we offered in 3 levels. Here are, I don't know the numbers by heart, but it's 30, 90, 100 controls, and building up in terms of the risk that you run or the maturity that you build up from a level basic, important to essential. These are concrete things that you can do to protect yourself, but we're also going to create a market where you can get certified on this. And so we work together with private companies who essentially take over a sort of supervision function from us in a first line of defense. We can come on top of that. But it creates a clear framework that you are certified, and then that will help you in your supply chain as well. If you can ask from your suppliers, you're certified by another private company, backed up by the government, then that will have this ripple down effect, and it's just something that we start, and then it takes over. But on the other side, the big providers, cloud providers specifically, but also the internet service providers, they have a lot that they see that we don't see. And I think it's proper that we don't see everything that they see, just to be clear. But in trying to build up that proactive defense that we are working on very hard as a CCB, we're missing data, we're missing things. There's a lot that the enemy is doing that we don't know about. And somewhere if we can increase that visibility that we have, that would be good. And we want to work on that, working on what we already do with internet service providers, the anti-phishing shield we have in Belgium, all our early warning system, our spear phishing. This is analysis and redirecting that private sector is much better in than us. And so we work together with them. We give a framework, they do the work, we pay them, they help us out to warn. I think that it's just a no-brainer. And that mentality has always been there in Belgium, but I think, or at least at the CCB, but it grows, and I hope it will take shape further in Europe. But of course, legal systems are a bit different. So let's see with maybe Digital Networks Act will maybe shape a little bit how we can work together with certain providers to increase that protection level.
Yeah, let's hope for that. Other aspect of cooperation. You are from Brussels. There are 2 headquarters of 2 organizations in Brussels, EU and NATO. From your perspective, how does this work, this cooperation in cyber, and what can be done to do it better?
Well,
that's a really easy question, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. The problem of how to balance NATO and European approaches and policies has been one that's there since the 50s, and I don't think we will solve it within the cyber community, and definitely not in this panel. I mean, the big first problem is, of course, that not every member of NATO is a member of Europe and the other way around. That makes that we have two different organizations. There are talks, but it's mostly informal, I must say. And I think the opportunity that we should look at is how to differentiate the things that we do. Where's the added value of NATO compared to the EU and the other way around? And on a very personal note, what I've seen so far is that EU is investing a lot in defending the victims, making sure that they are better prepared, infrastructure, etc. And on the other end, the response, like how to coordinate crisis, let's have these structures in place. Where NATO comes in, I think, is the in-between and the after. So the building up preparedness for very specific situations, very specific scenarios, having this readiness, let's say, that we don't see a lot in Europe. I think we call it preparedness there. And then, of course, the ultimate goal of NATO is to never have to use the collective defense and to have that deterrence in place, which is something that Europe can only do by its mere existence. But I think the force of NATO to hit back if it's really necessary is what they do very good. And I would personally invest in those differentiations rather than duplicating the work.
Varis, would you like to add something to that, EU-NATO?
Well, I can agree with what the colleague from Brussels said, and we definitely feel that in Latvia, for example, with support from EU, some of these information campaigns, they wouldn't happen probably if we wouldn't have EU support, also financial support on such a large scale. So cybersecurity fund that we had just recently, for example, and other initiatives. So definitely leveling certain cybersecurity postures and getting them on the same pace is one. With NATO, I think because of the structure, building the framework and making it more like a structured approach is something that can be definitely as an advantage. And yeah, as you just said, bringing these two qualities together, and maybe NATO could be a little bit more effective on building this collective approach also in cybersecurity, cyber response. So currently, I have to admit that those bilateral cooperations, they work faster and a bit more effective. But NATO is an alliance, a framework, and that could be definitely used for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned about the bilateral cooperation. It does work better and faster. Do you see in foreseeable future that we can use the big formats like EU and NATO for effective information exchange and fast information exchange?
Well, I mentioned this CERT network. This is something that probably it's not so formal as someone would like, but it works up to a certain level. And this is where we have to also create this common understanding of over-classifying data that is, I think, an issue in NATO. It's getting better, but still, why I'm saying it's getting better, because I actually see that the actionable data is now more and more, you can see it's declassified. The contextual data maybe still stays classified, but the cyber defenders, they need this technical data to be used to defend their infrastructures. And what I think might work with these large organizations like NATO and EU is maybe not exactly joint operations, but synchronized operations. For example, again, if I'm touching on threat hunting operations, we could do Belgium and Latvia and Lithuania, Estonia, something together in the same time frame, maybe not exactly joint operation, and then exchange findings, approaches, practices, etc. And NATO could facilitate that, for example.
We are running out of time, and I do have a few questions on Menti, and I would like to take them now. And the first one is I was surprised that we didn't mention it a bit more. NIS2, the NIS2 directive, which everybody loves, and there's a question on Menti. What can organizations and regulators do to ensure that frameworks like NIS2 drive real security improvements rather than becoming paper tigers? Normally, this question should be answered probably by the governments, but I will ask it to Uldis from TED. What do you see from the private sector perspective? That, you know, the NIS2, it came in Latvia. Of course, it was implemented by the national cybersecurity law. How would you answer to that question? What advice would you give to the governments and to the regulators how not to become paper tigers?
I don't see that we are paper tigers. I give you one example. Until like November 11th, every employee, including myself in TED, has to pass the cybersecurity training, which takes approximately 2 hours on average. And if you don't pass this training, if you then don't get the right score, your access name and password is terminated. Pretty simple motivation, yeah? And it really gives, no, like it's enforced, but we need it, yeah? I'm not sure how many other organizations in Latvia is having the same approach, because if I will not pass the test, I will not be able to switch on my laptop, which means most probably I will not get salary, which is not good, which motivates me and others. So yeah, we need to simplify those regulations, because there is one good organization in Europe, we are part of its European IT society. There is a dedicated cybersecurity group. All big European telcos are part of it. We exchange information on a reasonable level, but we don't have like 600-page regulation how we do it. And it's working. It's providing real benefit to all the members of this organization. Of course, there is a checks and something before you join the cyber task force, but it's pretty operational. So I believe NIS2 is a good and right way to go ahead, because what we are seeing in like practical life, not a lot of organizations are willing to invest in their cybersecurity. Everybody is saying this is top priority. It's important not only because of legislation, but for business continuity aspects. But nobody is actually doing it on a reasonably big scale. So regulation is needed. And we are not paper tigers. We are very practical.
Very short interjection there is that we try to keep in mind, especially when you're talking about sanctions and regulation, etc., that the enemy is the attacker and not each other. Yeah. I think that's the mindset that we try to take in Belgium as well, and keep that in mind, that the paper is just there to check that you're doing the right things to defend yourself against the real enemy, and take it in a step-by-step approach and leave the fines for when it's really, really people are not willing to engage.
That is true, unfortunately. Yeah, that sometimes, of course, not sometimes. It's always that the people are the weakest link in the cybersecurity. I have 2 more questions on Menti. I will try to connect them both. One is why the EU has not implemented block-wide rules for using obsolete software and hardware. Example: forbid unencrypted communication, forbid obsolete cipher usage, etc. And the other one is also about forbidding something. Why why the Russian networks have not been blocked within the EU? Not only networks, but also Russian domains. And here probably Varis and Pieter are the right ones to give an answer very shortly. 2 simple questions, Varis.
Well, there are probably a lot of perspectives on that. I think very good question would be why the Soviet Union top-level domain is still there. It's a repressive, aggressive regime that doesn't exist, luckily, anymore, but why the TLD is there. But to answer the original question, I think it is somewhat also useful to not block everything from these aggressive states, because you know where to expect something interesting or volatile. But obviously the attacks are not coming from Kremlin IP address space all the time. But I guess it's somewhat similar to diplomacy. You sometimes don't want to cut every single ties that you have also with aggressor. But yeah, well, I don't have a better answer to that at the moment.
Pieter, maybe you have
on the domains thing, we have a system in place, like probably several member states. If we see a domain that we know is malicious, and we're now adding also fraud elements to it, we redirect all Belgian users to a warning page. So in a sense, it's not full spectrum, but if we have clear indications that this is really bad, and then I mean, there's still traffic happening, so we can analyze, but the end user is redirected. On the other point, why we haven't abolished certain obsolete software, it seems like a request for more EU regulation, which at this point, let's implement what we already have. I think there's elements in the Cyber Resilience Act that actually touch upon this, that if your software is not up to date, it is not kept up to date for the life cycle that it's meant to be, then you're not compliant with that regulation. But we have a lot of work on implementing the Cyber Resilience Act, and I think everybody's talking a lot about NIS2, which is 80% of the attention, but only 20% of the effect, where I think Cyber Resilience Act has 20% of the attention, but 80% of the effect that it's, if it's implemented correctly, will really protect all our products. So let's implement first what we have well, and then...
Okay, right before the end, we have 15 seconds, but I hope we can get at least a minute. One final thought from this discussion: how to move the EU policy from just being a policy into action. Uldis, what would be your one thought from this discussion?
It's effective and simplified national regulation. I believe it's one thing in 5 seconds, which can help.
Okay, Varis.
Well, if not the original regulation, then additional documents that help to understand, or organizations responsible to explain that to the private sector, public sector, the community, and again, hands-on approach to policy.
I'm going to agree to all of that and add a good understanding of what everybody's role and responsibility is to foster that collaboration, not just civilian and military, but also with private sector as a service provider or as a critical infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to us. Thank you to the wonderful panel discussion that we had. Thank you to all the panelists. Let's give a round of applause to the panelists.
And to you as well, Edgars. And a gift from CyberChess. I know lunch is around the corner. You can find some candy in there and some cool cyber socks, which I got already. So, a round of applause to our panel and our moderator. Thank you very much.
All this.